most chefs' superpowers are cooking their own food. It is not rocket science. This is simply allowing you to be you.
Roni Mazumdar is the founder of Unapologetic Foods, building restaurants rooted in identity, pride, and real hospitality.
I still remember when we created that restaurant, we would actually go and ask the customers, like, would you like it mild, medium, hot, or Indian hot? But we created all of that kind of a jail and a cage around us. I call that the immigrant shackles. And that's how, in many ways, our cuisine was being held down. Why are we afraid of the spices? What's wrong with it?
What did your father teach you about hospitality that you still use every day, even at like the Michelin-Starred level, which you're at now?
Hospitality is an emotion that you convey from one person to another. I remember a moment in Masalawala, my father telling me there was a man who came in, who sat at the table, literally with his hand on his face. No question, no food orders, nothing. He gently went there, sat next to him. He says, "Are you okay?" It was not about food. It was not about a restaurant. It was not about a transaction. That's powerful. That's hospitality.
Bloomberg BusinessWeek named you one of the people who defined global business in 2021. What advice would you have if they're just starting out where you were 20 years ago, let's say?
I think it's very simple. I think
Roni Mazumdar, welcome to the Restaurant Reset. You've said that the name Unapologetic Foods, which is your restaurant company, exists because, quote, "We've been apologizing for who we are for way too long," which, like, I love that attitude. That's great. I think we need that a lot more. You've traced that impulse back to colonialism, to the immigrant experience, to the way Indian restaurants in America spent decades toning down dishes to make them more palatable for the Western audience. Here's what I keep coming back to, though. You weren't a chef. And I love this is a unique story about you. I've interviewed a lot of chefs and people come from different backgrounds, but you're the first one I've interviewed who's, come from this. You were working in software engineering at Johnson & Johnson before you started, your first restaurant. You graduated from RPI with an engineering degree. The reason you opened your first restaurant in 2011 wasn't some grand culinary vision. It was because your father, who'd been a traffic cop with the NYPD, was retiring, and you were worried that he'd have nothing to do, and you found the first location on Craigslist. Is that right?
kind of. Everything is right except for one thing. It's sure nothing to do, but more so, I didn't want him to feel obsolete, which is what happened to. Big difference.
Yeah.
In many ways, father has been the breadwinner for the family ever since I was born. I've seen him being so active in so many ways. And for once, being a first generation immigrant in this country, it felt like it was inevitable that he was going to start feeling like he didn't matter. So it goes back to a very common theme of what even Unapologetic Foods stands for today, which is that idea of self-worth. And in that discovery of hoping to find that for my father, I ended up finding my own.
That's awesome. Talk to me about that shift there. Like, at what point did kind of keeping that going with your father become, I'm going to fundamentally challenge how 1.4 billion people's food is represented in the most competitive dining city in the world? Like, what was the moment that shift happened, or did it kind of build slowly throughout the progression of that restaurant in its first years after opening?
I think it was a slow build that accumulated into one singular moment, which came years later into a restaurant called Adda Indian Canteen in Long Island City. So before I fast forward to Adda, I think the idea was the reality for many quote unquote ethnic food, a term I'm not a big fan of, to be honest. I don't know what it really means or how we came up with that. And I always clarify this, perspective of mine is that if you truly added up all of the ethnic food in the world, that's majority of the world.
Yeah.
How did become the sideline conversation? I don't know where and how that happened, but here's where we are. In many ways, an underrepresented cuisine, like it was at a time when we were, starting our adventure. And that is not to say that exciting Indian restaurants didn't happen in New York. It has happened many times over, way before we arrived. But the difference was it happened as a singular experiences. It didn't happen as a much bigger part of the conversation. There has been restaurants like Tabla that existed by Danny Meyer and Fuad Cardoz that has been groundbreaking in so many ways and has done amazing things. and many, many others that I can think about. And the ones that even exist from Edison, New Jersey to Jackson Heights, I think each has its own place in our society. What didn't change was the cultural norm, a shift in perspective from the general population towards seeing what that cuisine can be and accepting it for what it actually is. Digging a little bit deeper, I remember starting that first restaurant with my father without maybe while being a bit too naive. And I was quite apologetic in many ways at the time.
Mm.
It was more of survival. Let's hope this place works. And in a very naive way, we ended up putting up a lot of regional things that no one bought. So for a place that you're running out of a maxed out credit card, you can only go so far. So you're thinking, what's my survival? And okay, the survival is let's start to put in things that everybody's coming in and asking for. Do you have chicken tiki marsala? Terrible pronunciation and wrong in every way, by the way. It's not marsala.
Yeah.
But I've heard it all, right?
Yeah.
All of that added up to be a restaurant that became a little neighborhood joint. And me along the lines learning, why are people questioning and ranting with the fact that if the rice is not served with an entree, there's something wrong. But then we show up to a French restaurant where I'm willing to pay for a side of potatoes $15, and I'm not blinking an eye. Like, what's wrong with that conversation?
Mm.
And then I'm afraid, I still remember when we created that restaurant, we would actually go and ask the customers, like, would you like it mild, medium, hot, or Indian hot? Indian hot was a code word for like, okay, you're not BSing me. I'm going to give you the real deal.
Yeah. The real deal.
The real deal. But until then, if you just tell me hot, and I'm kind of going to assume, like, okay, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Sure, it's going to be hot. But we created all of that, some kind of a jail and a cage around us. That is, I call that the immigrant shackles. And that's how, in many ways, our cuisine was being held down. Why are we afraid of the spices? What's wrong with it? Why are we afraid of, oh my God, it has a level of oil. Oh my God, the meat is cooked differently. Oh my God, it uses yogurt in the gravy and it splits from the gravy, but so it doesn't look like a specific mother sauce from French cuisine. All of that is us trying to ape other cuisines to desperately fit into a mold that we don't really belong into.
Okay. So I was going to ask you to dive deeper into what does being apologetic look like? And maybe you just answered that with, trying to fit the mold of the cuisine you're trying to build into what was felt more socially acceptable to the mainstream food audience. But I don't want to put words in your mouth though. You help us understand, what does it mean to be apologetic in your world to people? Any specific examples that you can come up with? Like what?
You ever wake up in the morning and wonder if you and your food and your cuisine has any real worth or not?
Mm.
But there's a lot of people who do. And when you have that, it roots and creates an insecurity. That insecurity means that when you walk in through that door, there's a desperate attempt for me to try and hope that I somehow become a little bit more relatable to you, so you give me a chance.
Yeah.
That hope, that aspiration of hope of you accepting me, not for who I am, but I will change myself to whatever it is that I need to become for you to like me, is where the line of failure is. I'll give you a few examples. Each time I've asked the question, would you like it mild, medium, hot, was an apology. Each time I said, oh my God, that one has a little extra oil on it. Let me make it a little bit lighter for you. Why am I assuming that? Why am I assuming that? Because as if the rest of the world is, somehow unhealthy and somehow America is the symbol of health. Like, I have no freaking idea why we have created these ideas in our head. And I keep going. The idea of how every dish somehow became heavy cream laden is the ultimate form of apology. That is not how we have ever grown up eating. That is not the India that I have grown up in. No one in their homes in 1980s, 1990s had a clue of what the heck is heavy cream. We did it because a saag paneer emulated a creamed spinach in a steakhouse. A buttered chicken, and if you look at the gravy, emulated what is a spicy rigatoni sauce that we somehow associate ourselves with. These were all examples of us trying to fit in by putting the heavy cream, asking you the question in every possible way, making sure that maybe the music is a little bit different. All desperate attempts and trying to fit in, and those are the apologies.
I am someone who, whenever I am asked the question, whether it's at an Indian restaurant or a Thai restaurant, where they like give me a spice level, I say Indian hot or Thai hot because I want them.
Sure.
I love that spice. I understand spicy foods, not for everyone, but I think that I get to experience the full flavor when I do that. I think that's the best. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your unapologetic attitude there with saying we're going to serve it how it's meant to be, and you either like it or you don't.
Pause there for a second. I want to say serving spicy food doesn't mean it's unapologetic. That is not what the essence is. Serving a dish that is true to its own roots is what is being unapologetic. So each time there's a dish called champaran meat that we have in, it comes from Bihar, one of the poorest regions of India, and it's supposed to have a whole head of garlic unpeeled being cooked in the meat. The apology was secretly when we were all worried that we probably shouldn't do that. We should just confit the garlic and add it on top as a little garnish. And yes, we have these conversations behind the scenes. So each time when we thought of that, we were not thinking of the people who created the dish. If that dish comes from a rural region and a group of villagers are sitting in their own homes, do you think they're putting that in a confit garlic on top?
Yeah,
No, they're
no.
not. Therefore, the apology. So it's not about being spicy or not. It's about being true to, if it's supposed to be a yellow lentil that's mild, then let it be mild. Stop making it something that it doesn't need to be.
Authenticity is the word that I'm hearing coming through that.
It's a tricky word, the word authenticity, because I think in many ways you can never really recreate the exact same thing. But I think the ethos of it, the idea of what a dish stands for, or what the true meaning behind that is, can be somewhere conveyed and still transport the diner to that moment or as close to it as possible with a chef or a creator's perspective.
That's really helpful. That's a really helpful perspective. I think a lot more people, I mean, myself included, need to hear. I think your father's journey for this becomes, really compelling when it comes to this, because you know, that ethos is something that comes from someone who really has lived, in that cuisine, in that culture, where it comes from. And so he came from Kolkata,
Yeah,
New York.
I was born there as well. So both my, parents and I, all of us moved here in mid 90s.
Right. Yeah. 96. Right. And he ran a fruit cart in downtown Manhattan for a
Yeah.
bit, and then
Yeah.
took a civil service exam, became an NYPD traffic cop. I mean, that's a really important story, I think, to this country. And Masalawala, am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
All right. It's literally built though around his food memories, recreated with kind of the age-old technologies, family recipes. And you said this, I think you said it earlier too, that by realizing your father's dream, you kind of helped to realize your own. What did your father teach you about hospitality that you still use every day, even at like the Michelin-Star level, which you're at now?
All the awards and accolades are a byproduct of an emotion that hospitality really is. Hospitality is an emotion that you convey from one person to another. It's not the perfect words. You can be hospitable towards each other without speaking the language. There's so much of that we don't understand. I remember you mentioned the fruit cart. It was in front of one Battery Park Plaza, and I used to go and help my father there every single day before school. I remember there would be moments when people would cross 2 or 3 other fruit carts just to come to my father, who's selling the exact same fruit from the exact same supplier. What's the difference? Why did they do that first thing in the morning? They're all late for work. Why did people stop by? Maybe because there was an exchange of an emotion and something that you were able to make someone feel that changed their day. These were the same people that invited us into their homes. I've had dinners with some of our guests. How did my father achieve that? You're running the most humble thing in New York City. You're literally standing on the street. And I learned the greatest lesson of my life that no MBA program in the world can teach me is that it doesn't come from funding. It doesn't come from the glamour, the glitz. That is not the true meaning of hospitality. It is simply how you make someone feel. And if I'm giving you sometimes the simplest of things that I haven't even cooked, that is literally a piece of fruit, but it's the way I hand it to you. It's the respect that I give you. It's the way that you might feel heard. It's the way that you might want to open up and tell me about your day that's coming up or the challenges that you're dealing with. Those emotions are the most powerful exchanges and the biggest currency that we actually have. And to me, that is the biggest lesson that I learned from my father, that how you can take some of the most humble means and yet build lifelong relationships. I remember a moment in Masalawala, my father telling me there was a man who came in, who sat at the table, literally with his hand on his face. No question, no food orders, nothing. And my dad knew it was a person from the neighborhood who it was. He gently went there, sat next to him. He says, "Are you okay?" And he said, I'm going through a divorce. Today it just became final with my wife of 40 years. And all I wanted to do was come over and see my friend. It was not about food. It was not about a restaurant. It was not about a transaction. Tell me how any amount of money can change that conversation. You can't recreate that. That's powerful. That's hospitality.
Wow. I mean, that is powerful. And I feel like it's almost like you can't go to school for that.
No, you can't.
It is something it's caught. It could potentially be taught, but it is almost a vibe about you. And I love hearing that story of your dad. I wanted to ask, you have the experience from the fruit cart, and that you take that, and then you hop into a full blown restaurant. And he was 75 when that restaurant was running. What was it like watching him in the restaurant? And what was I mean, I hear some similarities already between the same father you saw at the fruit cart in the restaurant, but was there anything different? Did he evolve in some way in that environment of the restaurant? Tell me more about that.
I think there was a lot more command of what that room was like. Like there would be people. The Prime Minister of Malta dined in a tiny 28-seater place in the Masalawala in the Lower East Side. And after his UN meetings, because everyone told him this is the place he needed to go to. And that's all because of my father, not for me. And I was on the sidelines watching, learning, seeing what was breaking this industry in so many ways. And I, yes, I was instrumental in helping my father start that, but the full ownership and the credit goes to him. He owned every minute. Now, what was different was that he followed no rules. And it was to a point of, you want to talk about unapologetic? I mean, it was absurdity that didn't make any sense to anyone because the rule books of what fine dining or food and hospitality that stands for, he broke every norm and somehow got away with it and created a line out the door every single day. There would be people coming in who would say, "Oh my God, I'm totally full." My father would walk up and say, "You're not full. You're not walking out of my restaurant without finishing the dish." It's exactly how he would talk as if when a family member would visit the house.
Yeah.
Who does that to a customer? No one. And I'm like humiliated practically in the corner. I'm like, this is so embarrassing. And yet, those are the same people bringing him Christmas gifts and shoes and
Yeah.
whatnot because he took so much ownership and care. He didn't just do that because just to pick a fight. He says there was something human about it. And I think that's also going back to the essence of what hospitality is. In a city built on brick and mortar and glass, I think we all somewhere want to feel a little human. And when we walk into those moments and step into that, and we feel an environment that's filled with love and care, I think something elevates us.
Those statements are the things that remind me of the hope in humanity, that in this age of everything's AI, everything is how is technology going to change all these things? And certainly technology has its place, but the beautiful thing about the restaurant industry is that hospitality is inherently human. Like, truly, there's something that is never going to be recreated by the way your father acted with people, and there is this yearning in us for that feeling of home, that feeling of family, even if we're in a faraway city somewhere. To be able to have that type of experience is very special, and it's something that comes from a good heart of hospitality. And I think that's something that we all need to be reminded of in this business, is that it's almost a special, almost sacred thing about the industry that is so unique compared to so many other types of businesses that can be run. And I feel like for me, it's just really refreshing to hear that from you as an operator, even as I sit working with all kinds of operators. Just a reminder that, man, that's good and wholesome, and it just feels right to hear. It makes me want to go to a local restaurant and just spend some time.
But I think that's what, when you think about food, there's an aspect of it that's a bit sacred. There's actually, this is a product that you're allowing to be a part of your body. It's not something that's external, like a perfume, for example, which is still one of the senses. But in this case, imagine the amount of trust it takes without realizing
Oh
it's so
yeah.
primal, but yet so much trust is required of what it takes for me to actually pick up something and eat and feel safe about it. And we don't realize how we yearn for that kind of a moment to surround us. If not, we would all be in a basement somewhere eating a sandwich, and that's our days would go by. It is no longer about sustenance. The very essence of why restaurants exist and why they continue to do that and in different forms is because somewhere we're all seeking that emotion.
Yeah. Oh man, I completely agree. And I think the thing that I come back to is hearing you say all of these things, they're very profound and they come from a deep understanding of hospitality and the restaurant space. But I'm reminded of your background, being working in engineering, right? And getting the degrees that you got, many people come up in the restaurant industry through kitchens, through learning under chefs for decades even before they start their own restaurants. You came up through a completely different world from that. What did your background in engineering and your experiences in life prior to being a restaurateur change about your mindset now that you became a restaurateur and you're experiencing kind of traditional hospitality? Like, what is different about your background? How have you seen that compared to other folks in the industry you've met who've all just come up through the kitchens, come up through the restaurant space?
While it's important to have these emotions as being the front runner of a conversation, it still needs to be grounded in reality. And there's a foundation that's really required. I believe that in many ways, working in the Fortune 500s, allowing myself to see the world from a different perspective allows me a different toolbox, which is to how to build the infrastructure that's really required to build an organization that is leading with emotion. So emotions alone could be challenging. And this is why you see the failure rate at our industry is very high. And also, any industry that has a low barrier of entry tends to have a high failure rate. That's not just this restaurant industry, that's many other industries. But in many ways, a culinary school or a traditional school isn't really always giving you the tools to really go out there and make the decisions that could be something that is replicable. That could be, and by replicable, I'll clarify that, but that's replicable, that is a foundation and a function behind it. And it's really built on an infrastructure rather than saying, here's me a restaurant. Now, this is why independent restaurants, singular restaurants we have all seen have succeeded in the past for many quote unquote ethnic food, as I mentioned. We're probably the first group of an Indian American operators to have arrived with the number of restaurants and all the things that has happened. Now, what is the difference between that single restaurant and a group? Because it's a completely different world and how you run the business and how you run the operations. That's where I believe that my background was able to give me that opportunity to walk in through the door with a very different perspective to achieve that.
Yeah, I certainly that is really kind of the secret sauce of going from one to many, certainly in a repeatable structure that you can build. And I definitely understand where the engineering mindset can help there. So that I think that makes a lot of sense. You kept your job at Johnson & Johnson for 4 years before you left that to work full time in the restaurant space, right?
About, yeah.
So what was it like running a restaurant? 'Cause this is actually pretty, unique. And I'm curious, like, what would it be like if I was to open a restaurant, but I still have my day job as well? I can never imagine doing that. And you did it. Like, what was it like running a restaurant while working full time in tech? And when did you know it was time to quit?
Sure. For me, I don't think I would have been able to achieve that without my father. So the biggest thing that I had, the biggest gift my father could have given me was being who he was. It allowed for me to see the world very differently. He created opportunities for me to live the life that I am living today. And he took that chance. He was there every single day. So he's there opening, he's there closing. I'm there working after hours to make sure that I'm supporting my father. I'm doing the deliveries and serving tables when someone didn't show up, doing all of those factors. But it gave me the opportunity to learn. So for those, technically, Johnson and Johnson and the next phase of me opening Unapologetic Foods was very critical because those about 6 years or so were tremendous amount of learning. That's when I started to realize how broken our industry is. Why is there a hierarchy? Why can't I afford to charge you more? What is wrong with quote unquote mom and pop shops? Fundamentally, why is it flawed in so many ways and why it works and yet we find it so endearing? There's so because I've lived in that shoe. I have not just like observed it as like a McKinsey white paper to understand what it looks like. It's one thing to observe, it's another to live day to day and that becoming your reality, and then actively thinking about how you will transform that. So that's when I recognize that the only way it's it's a really difficult business for independent restaurants because everything feels uphill. You don't have the purchasing power. You actually don't have much leverage at all from anything. Every vendor can just walk all over you because guess what? You don't really, you're just another guy in a small restaurant that's just asking for a better deal. So is 10 other people. What difference does it make? But when you are a group and the conversation changes, you can build the partnerships, you can build relationships because it's also fruitful for that vendor. And all of that, I was sitting there as I was working day to day, living through the trials and tribulations. I understood maybe one day I can change that.
One of the things I would be remiss to not talk about, because you kind of talked about how do I, as this type of concept, how can I like, you know, raise my check average? How can I make this business better? Why is it so hard for these types of concepts? And one, I would be remiss if I did not talk about this because it is my favorite podcast, and that is NPR's Planet Money. I love the stories they tell, and your episode, you got to be on this episode, which I would love to be involved in an NPR Planet Money at some point. So I'd love to hear more about that. But you got featured on this episode where they were kind of doing a restaurant makeover at Ada. Where you went and actually improved your check averages from 36.80 to 45.90 per person by just redesigning the space, by looking at that. They kind of came with you along that journey. Do you think the restaurant industry undervalues the analytical side of running a restaurant? What do you think they should look to in order to improve that? Because I feel like there's a lot, margins are so thin. You got to get into the analytics of things, I think.
Sure. I think this is where fast casuals do a hell of a lot of better job than independent restaurants. So when we talk about restaurant industry, we have to understand what is it about the industry that we're talking about. Are we talking about multi-unit chains or are we talking about, because in those cases, a Shake Shack is very aware of analytics,
Yeah.
very aware. But an independent restaurant sitting in Crown Heights might not be. And that's where the problem happens. You don't have the resources and the ammunition to figure out exactly how to look at that analytics because you're so busy working day in, day out to figure out how to survive, how to make ends meet, how to really pay your bills. So that reality of the everyday operations is what's keeping you busy. And you don't really have the ability or the willingness sometimes. But I have one day that I barely take off. Is this really the day I'm going to sit here with analytics? And most people don't give a damn about it.
Yeah.
That's what ends up happening. But I think it's extremely critical. I thought it was an important episode because I think it gave me a perspective that I was aware of. I knew there would be changes coming along the way for this. And maybe, again, it has a lot to do with my background that I was open to such conversation, right? Most operators would brush it off and say, what's the point? Why am I doing this? I have enough customers. I'm busy right now. Life is different. Why am I wasting my time doing it? Well, maybe it's going to yield to nothing. But I knew somewhere deep down that I think there is a slightly better opportunity here to achieve something better. When we built Adda Indian Canteen, it was the first time in my life that I saw lines wrapping around the block for any Indian restaurant in my lifetime. I've never seen that before. I've seen busy restaurants. I've never seen lines where people are getting into fights. They're sitting with coolers and they're camping out just to dine at a restaurant that was built with plywood that I bought from Home Depot and with the sheer grit of Chef Chintan, who is, I would say, the reason why the big shift to unapologetic happened. I think it would be, the story would not be complete if he's not in the picture. I can have all the grit and the gut, but at the end of the day, what really was a driving force was Chef Chintan in many ways. That's who really said, this is the direction. I really believe in this. I think we should do it. And I knew way before Chef Chintan, sitting there in that restaurant with my dad, that I think it is critical to have a chef who's really part of the conversation. I just couldn't find one. America had its own challenges of different kinds of chefs. Either you try to become a celebrity chef, or you're kind of, a guy driving an Uber and then hoping to become a chef. There is not that idea that is now thriving in India wasn't there in America about 15 years ago. It wasn't the same thing. There were wonderful chefs, but they were one off. And as an independent restaurant, you also can't afford a high quality chef. So there's so many different facets to which you want to make a change so desperately, but the economic model that you're surrounded by doesn't allow for that change to happen. So Chef Chintan coming into the mix, us making a fundamental decision about a change, being on Planet Money, seeing how smaller changes, it's kind of this atomic habits theory, technically, like how it can yield incredible exponential results, was a summary of that.
So you talked about Chef Chintan, and he obviously is a huge catalyst and the reason that the talent behind a lot of that food and that vision. And it seems that you've got this model, and you talk about finding these chefs, and I want to dive into that actually a little bit, because you find these incredibly talented chefs from specific regions of India, and you give them a platform and resources to cook their food without compromise and just let the quality of that speak. Is that a fair summary of kind of how you're thinking about chefs? And if so, how do you scout and identify that talent? Like, how do you find, the next Chef Chintan?
I don't think you find them, you make them. It's two very different things.
Oh, yeah.
Every single one of us have a superpower. And I think it's important to recognize that every single one of us have that. Now, someone might not want to explore that, so you eliminate that conversation. I remember, but no, there's enough people out there who might not be excited to find that, and they're okay being where they are. But the glimmer you look for is that, are you willing to find your best self? The same way how we are every day striving to find ours. And I think in many ways, between Chef Chintan, myself, and today in the group, it's more than a platform. It's a set of ideals that has been created to be what is unapologetic. That has become an incredible calling card for many people to gravitate towards, to say, wow, I remember my conversation with Chef Vijay, who says, all my life I've wished that I could cook my own food. You know what is his superpower? Cooking his own food. You know what most chefs' superpowers are? Cooking their own food. It is not rocket science. This is not like this crazy idea that I have come up with. This is simply allowing you to be you. If you ask me what unapologetic stands for, it means stop apologizing to the world for something you are not and just be whoever the F you are.
I love that.
That's it. So if you look at Chef Vijay, what is his true identity? He comes from a rural background. His family still has farms. He grew up eating food in a very different environment and a construct than most of us grow up in India with, including me. So I saw this incredibly fresh perspective, allowing him to simply be him. The credit is him. It's Chef Vijay and his credibility for what he's achieving. It's not me. It's no one else. We're all there as a team, of course. But when I allow you to be simply you and not try to change that, I think it creates magic. Now, if that you, in many ways, are not willing to also listen to each other, I think problems get created. That's when egos get created, etc. So that's a dangerous statement that I just made. So everybody here needs to be very aware of what the reality of that means. Allowing Chef Vijay to be him and making sure that he can be also requires Chef Vijay to coordinate, listen, understand, be open to conversations. If that didn't happen, there would be no Chef Vijay. Most people think, how easy is this? Find a person, tell them to cook their best food, life happens. It's not.
Yeah.
The idea is to allow people to run in their own lanes and establish those lanes early on. And trusting each other even as you fall and stumble, and lifting each other up rather than constantly saying, I told you so, that might not have been the right move. I remember Chef Chintan telling me when we first started working, and he says, Roni, we're not always going to agree on things. But if we still decide to move in a direction, we cannot drag our feet as we are. And this is way before we started working. And it's an incredibly powerful statement when it comes to partnerships.
Mm.
There's so many things we disagree on all day, every day. Probably we are really different people. But there are moments, even though I don't agree with him or he doesn't agree with me, if it's a business related decision, he will literally defer to me and say, okay, I'm not sure if that's the right move. You want to do it? I'm in. I've never seen him back off. I would do the same thing. I'm like, I think that dish is not really going to take off. I'm not sure. And I've been proven wrong multiple times. It's okay to be proven wrong. I think too many times we allow our egos to become part of the conversation rather than the human and the trust factor. So, do I
Mm.
trust any of these people? Yes, it's not about creating a platform, but build something where they feel like there's a sense of trust. It goes back to the same essence of the food being sacred and how there's so much trust required as you consume it. Same way how a person is able to open up to my father in a fruit stand because they trust each other. They know this person might be interested in who they are. They feel heard. Same way all of these chefs, all of these conversations go back to those same exact theory.
Yeah, I think that's a really healthy, attitude when it comes to partnerships. I think you're spot on, and I think, you've got all different kinds of concepts, everything from Michelin-starred Semma down to like a fast casual Indian fried chicken window in the East Village, and you've got all these different concepts underneath Unapologetic Foods. And one of the things that you've said is that you'll never do a licensing deal. That every restaurant under Apologetic Foods owned and operated by you, and that's a deliberate choice. But this is in an industry where franchising and licensing are really almost like seems like a default growth model. Is there anything that it would take for you to change your mind on that, or is that truly a non-negotiable about you? And for the operator listening, because I know there are several who are kind of in that spot where they've got 3 or 4 locations, and they're probably starting to get approached by people saying, "Hey, we might want a franchise," or "Hey, let's talk about a licensing deal." What should they think about as they think about that?
Sure. And I think it's important to make sure we understand that the industry isn't monolithic. So you need to separate ideas one from the other. There are ideas that are scalable. There are ideas that are not. And you need to be aware of what they are and which one should you scale. If there's someone who has created 4 locations of something that's a fast casual and they're being approached for a licensing deal or a franchising, make sure that the partnership is right. But it's okay to take a chance. It's not a crime to be a franchise. The only reason where I am not that excited by it is that you lose a bit of control. Like we had opportunities to open up something in an airport and we chose against it, right? This is right here, JFK, is because it wasn't at that phase of the company. I don't think the infrastructure that we had would support a complete third party just telling them what the recipes are and hoping to God that it works. Then everybody looks kind of weird in the process because it's a representation of your brand in the end.
Yep.
Is it just a transaction or are you doing it for a different reason? That driving factor, that conversation is very important to have with yourself. So coming back to this, if it's a specific independent restaurant that has its own little nuance, maybe that's not the right thing to franchise because we've seen all of those things how that it plays out. But if it is a scalable model, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just a matter of figuring out what the right model is. I'm not That's not the first thing that I go for, but if it's the right kind of partnership, if there's enough of a trust, sure, something that can be looked at.
That's helpful. I think it is good to know that this isn't really a black and white type of a thing. It's an opportunity by opportunity basis, and I think you have to be true to who you are as a brand. And it sounds like that's where you've landed when it comes to Unapologetic Foods.
We try. We're not perfect by any means. There's so many things we get wrong every single day. There's this idea that sometimes, achievements, accolades can be blinding. It it it
Yeah.
it tells a story that everything is perfect when it's not. There are plenty of problems, plenty of challenges that we face on a daily basis, like any other business does. We're blessed to have lines out the door and the tables, impossible to get, etc. That helps a lot with the overall conversation. But that doesn't mean all the problems are gone. And I think it's important to know what are you building? Why is there Maybe a Rowdy Rooster can be more than a few locations. We're building a Indian canteen. If it goes to a different city in Philadelphia, does that look and feel exactly the same, or does it have its own little narrative? How do you play that? It really depends on the specific brand that you have created. And I think it requires each individual to take a step back and not just sign the dotted line as quickly as possible. Mistakes are made every time we think about, oh my God, I think I'll get some money out of it. And everybody's strapped for cash all day. So people end up making those decisions and then regretting it later. So if you didn't lead with the conversation of the transaction and the money, but led with the idea of why you want to do something, I think it would be much healthier and much more exciting of a growth opportunity that's more sustainable.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, selfishly, I would love to not have to travel to the East Village to, go to Rowdy Rooster because that looks amazing and I want to eat that. And I wish it was closer to Charlotte. So I mean, I hear you. I I'm excited by food. And I think the thing is you can't lose that passion. You can't lose that excitement, the why behind what you do. You talked about accolades, and I think this is kind of where I'd love to try to land the plane a little bit because I appreciate your humility there and the vulnerability and openness to just talk about the fact that you've had so much like vulnerability, transparency, openness to talk about that there are still challenges, right? No one just because you have a bunch of accolades, challenges don't go away. But Roni, like what the world sees you at though, they've certainly noticed who you are and what you've been doing. Bloomberg BusinessWeek. I'm gonna go down a list of accolades for you just to give everyone. Because if you're not familiar with Roni, like we need to make sure everyone understands, who this man is. Bloomberg BusinessWeek named you one of the people who defined global business in 2021. Cranes named you 40 under 40. Food and Wine named you one of 16 people changing the way we eat and drink. The Observer ranked you number 3 on their dining and nightlife power list. I mean, these are accolades after accolades, and people will look and see the lines out the door and see what you've done in this industry, and they look at you and say, "How can I be like Ron? How can I get there? What do I need to do or change about my life? How do I do that?" To the people who are looking at you, what advice would you have from them, looking back on your career, seeing what you've done to that, you would not have known had you not gone through it, right? What advice would you have if they're just starting out where you were 20 years ago, let's say, and thinking about how do I get there? What advice would you have for that person?
Take a leap. I think it's very simple. I think too many of us aspire to be many things, but when the rubber hits the road, we feel a little bit shy. We tend to back off because when it hits the road, reality hits. No one knows that this is the same Ronnie minus all the accolades that wasn't able to pay himself a salary in the beginning of this entire adventure. No one knows what survival was like. No one knows what it was to, have a family and a kid at home and really worrying about what the future of it looks like, drowning in credit card debt. No one knows that because we don't talk about it. We read about the awards. We don't talk about these problems. The truth of the matter is, we all at some point appreciate the outcome, but we are not always ready to take on the challenges that comes along the way to get there. And I always say a path to success, which I'm nowhere near, is not around failure, but straight through it. But so I think the one advice that I would have, and I get calls like this on a daily basis, in a month, there's probably like 10 to 15 conversations that happen where it's the same exact question. I have this job, I work in this industry, I no longer want to do it. And it's a generational shift that I think we're going through because very few people have found their voice in food. This is an industry that was primarily run by people who didn't belong in finance or medicine from an Indian community. So therefore, they kind of found that as a sense of livelihood. But this is the first time we're seeing, wait a minute, a real organization and a company can be built that we can be proud of, that we can actually change not from a financial structure alone, but really the ethos and a real seismic shift towards the emotional nature of what the broader population is thinking and leave that mark behind, right? So legacy, that conversation. But I don't think enough people are out there to actually take the leap. I remember having a conversation with someone and this person says, I want to do exactly what you do. Oh my God. I'm like, okay, well, If that's the case, I'm not asking you to do this for free. I'll give you a really bare bones salary. I'll give it to you. Take a flight, come over. It was somewhere in the Midwest. Come over in the next 2 weeks. The rest of it we'll have to figure out. The person says, okay, can I get a day to decide? I knew where this is headed. But that's what I'm saying. We all want something, but are we ready to go and achieve that and truly accept the fact that it might not actually pan out? No one held my hand and told me, one day, if you keep going, you might come to this point, these awards might come. There were many days of my life, majority of it for that matter, where there were no awards, no accolades, nothing existed. The only thing that existed was, I need to get to tomorrow. Without any hope of ever anything to be received, without any recognition to come. But I think I really want to do this. I had no idea that the work that we do will actually end up impacting so many different people on a generational side, where so many young people are reaching out, and it's fascinating to see. But what I did know was that I think there's an opportunity to find my own voice, find the voice of my own community, and maybe one day a little change would happen. I used to create this idea in my own head that maybe in the next 20 years or before I die, if I can see a change, man, that would be called success. And it happened in less than 5 years. Nobody could have predicted that. If they could, there would be enough chat GPTs answering that bullshit answer. That's not how it works. Somebody has to take a fucking leap.
I love it. Roni, I love that. I feel like we got to end on that. That's exactly where we gotta end for our listeners. Take the leap. If you're gonna do it and you believe in it, take the leap. And if you don't feel that confident, then don't.
Then it's not for you.
It's not for you, right? That's if you're like, wait, hold on, I need a day to think about it. Well, hold on.
You had your whole life. No, it's my wife asked me this question when nothing was working out. She's like, how do you know this is what you're meant to do? And I said, you know how I think I know? And I had no book, nothing telling me that this is the answer. I said, if you need external motivation to support you and in wanting to do something versus if you can't stop yourself from doing something are two different things. You know it's your own voice when you can't stop yourself from moving in that direction despite all the odds that are against you. That's when you know it's your voice. So if you find that, keep going.
That's amazing. Roni Mazumdar, thank you so much for this type of wisdom. That gives me the chills, man. That's really good. Thank you so much for joining us for this time. We can't wait to see when you say you're not at success yet. We can't wait to see what success looks like for your group. And I'm excited to see what comes from that. Thank you so much for this time.
And Andy, it means a lot. Thank you.
Restaurant Reset is sponsored by Genius for Restaurants, the modern point-of-sale system from Global Payments. Genius helps you reach your most important goals, whether that's simplifying your operations, speeding up your checkouts and table turns, easily expanding into new locations, or building loyalty with guests. To find out more, visit globalpayments.com/genius.